I'm Scott L. Miller. It's the 5th of November, 2023. This is my vlog of daily life living Leon, Nicaragua. Sorry for the lack of walking around and doing neat seeing neighborhood and stuff videos. We're going to be getting to more of that, I hope, really soon as I go out on a trip. But right now I am still scrambling to get things caught up so that I can go on said trip. So for today, we're here in the garden again on another beautiful day. And actually we have a great breeze today, so this is really nice. And we're going to be answering some more questions from teacher Andrew, who has a slew of really great questions for the community. For those of you who have not had your own questions answered, probably because you haven't answered them, I'm sorry, ask them. Scroll down and ask your own in the comments. I love getting the questions because it makes it much easier for me to make the show. And I have something specific that I know is helpful for someone. I can't speak today, rather than simply talking about the things that I think you're going to want to know about. So get down and do that while you're listening to The Bump. Because of the way that I schedule the show, you're watching this most likely on the 12th. At least the majority of my audience watches the shows on the day that they release. Not everybody for sure, but the majority of you do. And so I'm making this for the 5th. It will be airing on the 12th, which is a Sunday. And that means if all is going well at the time that you're watching this, I am actually on a plane on my way going through Peru. So I will have left Costa Rica at some point during the day, probably after you've watched this episode. But if you're watching it later in the day, you may see it. I'll be flying to Peru during the night and on to Bolivia, which I should be arriving at in your real time tomorrow. That's going to get really confusing, so I'm not going to do too much of that. Mostly we're going to keep the episodes where they go. But just to give you a little bit of why we're racing to keep up the pace on all of this, because the same thing is happening to me. I'm trying to keep track of these days, get these things out, and get them ready so that we're able to do the show. So today we're doing questions from teacher Andrew. I'm going to bring up the first one and see what he has to ask us today. Hello, Scott. I love the show. I've been following you for quite some time. This is actually one of his oldest questions. I realized that Nicaragua could really be one of my top choices to live around the world. Today, I have some tax questions. I don't know much about what you know, so anything you can share, I would much appreciate. I'm a former tax preparer for H&R Block. I'm just unfamiliar with how everything works abroad, which is normal. Even like CPAs very rarely deal with this. It may seem like, a popular thing, and it's a popular thing to fantasize about, but it's not a very popular thing to actually both move abroad and qualify for the United States tax abroad programs. And so very few people actually end up needing to actually talk to a CPA about it, rather than just going, could I do that? And then your normal accountant goes, no, and that's the end of it. I'm currently working as an appliance sales specialist at $22 per hour at Lowe's. Considering looking for those who know, that's like Home Depot. Considering looking for a remote position with Lowe's to be able to do while in Nicaragua, Lowe's will be giving me a W-2. For those not from the United States, W-2 is the form used to declare your taxes for a normal everyday employee. We use the term in the US W-2 employee to refer to normal employees. That's all. But if you're not an American, the fact that we use tax forms to refer to those kinds of things, very confusing. I also work as an online teacher through OutSchool, which pays me through PayPal, and I get a 1099K. Once again, a 1099 employee is a different type of employee. It's a contract employee, or one where your employer is not paying their portion of your taxes. This is totally legal in most cases, but it's important to understand that you are on the hook for the employer side of taxes, not just the employee side of taxes. Now, this is a 1099 that I'm talking about. This is a 1099K. The 1099K is essentially the same document, but it refers to people who are not getting paid by an employer, but by an online services or marketplace system. So, for example, if you were a seller on Amazon and they were making payments into your account, at the end of the year, they would issue you a 1099K to declare to the government what you had made through their platform during the year. It's just a very slight designation difference. I just want to preface, though, I've never actually worked with a tax preparer with a 1099K, so I'm assuming that it works the same as a 1099, and I have good reason to believe that it does, but just be aware, maybe there's some difference, but I'm not aware of one. When you have a U.S. address and technically reside in Nicaragua, how do you show that to the U.S. government in order to not pay income tax? Do you put your Nicaraguan address on your tax return? Also, if I have a 1099-K with a U.S. address, can I still file that the same way to avoid income tax? Anyway, I'm still figuring out what other source of income I can bring over to Nicaragua and hopefully to be able to also avoid paying income tax. Lastly, do you use an accountant or do you use tax filing software? I've heard that Thai tax is good. Thanks for all you do. Appreciate the info on this channel. All right, so what he's talking about for Americans is that we have this thing called the foreign earned income system, where if you're making money abroad and it's a reasonable amount of money, currently up to roughly $120,000 per year US, you do not have to pay normal income taxes on that. There are a few little tiny things you have to pay that are just trivial and everyone has to pay them. And if you go above the 120, you start paying taxes on the amounts above that, and it doesn't include capital gains or anything like that. So this is a really important thing because anyone who's getting a W-2 or a 1099, the standard employment mechanisms, don't have to pay their taxes on that when they're under the threshold, but they do have to file and declare their taxes, which of course he's mentioning. So the easiest question first, what do I do as far as tax preparation? I use an accountant. I have a business. I have complicated taxes sometimes. I have an accountant that handles all of that. It just makes life easy. Yes, there's fees associated with having an accountant, so I lose some money based on that, but it does protect me quite a bit. I recommend having a CPA, but if you're definitely looking to cut corners as much as possible and you have very straightforward tax filing, then some tax software may work for you. Just be aware sometimes that tax software doesn't have all the correct answers, but then again, neither do CPAs. Quite often I've had to work with a CPA. They'll say, you don't qualify for foreign earned income. And I say, yeah, I do. Right here, the rules are black and white. I am so completely qualifying for it. And they'll be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea how the rules worked. And you're like, aren't you a CPA? Isn't this one of those basic ones that like everyone's supposed to know? But real problems in the real world. But at least you can discuss it with a CPA and say, here's what the tax rules say. I'm following the tax code. This is very plain English. I think I qualify. And I've had no problem when doing that. So as far as the normal W-2 in that, yes, use your address in Nicaragua or use an address in the United States. It doesn't matter. Where you file from has really no bearing on anything, right? Like I maintain an address in the United States and you can send things to there, but I don't abode there, right? I am spending my time living here in Nicaragua, which you can tell very easily by watching my videos. Sure, I could be flying to the US every few hours and flying back immediately to make another video, but that would be crazy. It'd be easy to show that on the border control records. So the thing that the United States really cares about is where you're staying throughout the year, and as long as there is a country that is able to claim you during that time. I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but if you're here in Nicaragua or just outside the US but not in international waters, in a territory that is able to claim you completely for a day, or a combination of territories that are able to claim you completely through a day, then that qualifies as being outside the United States. Your mailing address is not part of that equation at any time. So as long as you're in Nicaragua enough, you can file on your taxes and say, I was not tax resident in the United States. And they may follow up on that, so make sure you maintain some records. But it's generally not very hard. For some people, some very special cases, it could get kind of hard. But for normal people, especially if you're, for example, coming to Nicaragua, and let's just do the simplest example. You're leaving on December 31st, and you're going to be in Nicaragua from before midnight on January 1st all the way through the end of the year. Not a single moment spent outside of Nicaragua. You've got the easiest situation. It's easy to show in your passport that you are entering Nicaragua before the beginning of the year, and you can show that the entire year you never exited. It's that simple. You qualify, right? Now, if you start getting into how many days, because there are day allowances for different things, if you start transiting between countries, then you may have to show a whole bunch of stamps in your passport. If you get really crazy, you may have to show stamps in multiple passports. You may be asked to show some supporting documentation like airline miles or something. But in general, it's very straightforward and it's not weird, and it's based on where you are physically present, not on your mailing address. So someone like me, who for a very long time lived outside the US, but I used my father's house as my mailing address because it was my childhood home. Why would I change it? That is where all my mail went. But the government doesn't care about where they're sending that, right? They only care about where you are. So that should all be the same. Now, I'm going to talk about something I'm guessing at. With the 1099, you definitely don't have to pay income tax. However, this is very important. When you're paying a 1099, when you're paying the taxes on a 1099 or 1099-K in your case, you are paying income tax on one portion if you're paying. You are also paying an employment tax on another portion. Employment taxes I don't believe, have any allowance for you being outside of the country, meaning I believe you still have to pay some taxes on that money. It is simply not the portion designated as income tax, because it is not taxes on the income. It is because you are your own employer, and so you have to pay the employer tax side of that equation. 1099s get very complicated because of that, because most people, when they look at it, they just think of it as either a tax dodge, which it is not, you do owe taxes on all that, or they think of it as an employment thing, which it is, but it is also an employee thing. It is both directions. The employment side, I've been employed by someone, and employee side, I have an employee. So you have to think of it as essentially self-employment. You're representing yourself. And it doesn't always mean that. You can still be the employee of somewhere else and get a 1099. I did this for a very long time. So I'm one of those semi-special cases. I don't want to say special case because it's, I don't know, 40% of people with 1099s actually fall under this. It's just not the main case. And that is that while working for a long time on Wall Street, I was a full employee with full employee rights and benefits as the law dictates, but I was paid on a 1099. It's absolutely fine as long as all parties agree and no one's trying to, not pay their taxes to the government, which I was not. I paid my taxes. The company acted as an employer. I had employee rights, and everybody was hunky-dory. It's not the way that the government would prefer you did it, but it's not a big deal because as long as they're getting their tax money, everybody is happy. And it does provide some flexibility to you potentially. Most people, normal people, should not want a 1099. It's just too much hassle. But for some people, especially those who are running their own businesses, doing extra work on the side, maybe combining a bunch of different income streams, 1099s give you a little bit more flexibility. If you're running your own business in any way, then you need a 1099 under normal circumstances because it allows you to manipulate your taxes appropriately, such as I bought a laptop so that I could work for a client. That laptop is part of my job, not a form of entertainment or just a personal device. Therefore, it has a different tax status than a laptop I would buy for video games, for example. So being able to do those things generally requires a 1099, or at least that makes it far easier. So that's one of the reasons why people tend to go that direction. It makes for a lot more flexibility when you are self-employed or acting as if you're self-employed. So those are some of the reasons those exist. Sometimes it just exists because, for example, with the 1099K, you're working with a marketplace of some sort online. So you don't have a strict employer, but they still need to declare your income status to the government so that taxes can be handled appropriately. So don't be surprised when you have to pay taxes on that 1099, but I expect it's going to be a fraction of what you would normally pay until you start hitting that $120,000 threshold. Then it'll be all back to normal. All right, that was our first question. All right, second question, also from Andrew. If someone is moving to Nicaragua and not sure what they will want or need for living there, would you recommend keeping a bunch of your stuff in the United States in storage and just bringing very little, only essentials, until you get situated in an apartment, and then maybe next trip to the US, you'll have a better idea of what you need and what you can sell or donate? If you bring over a bunch of stuff in checked bags, is it easy to find a taxi or some other form of transportation to drive you to a specific city or place? I imagine when you're first coming to Nicaragua and walking down the streets looking for an apartment, you probably don't want to be carrying around a ton of stuff. So absolutely, I think for normal people, and there's a lot of gray area in this, right? There's no single answer. For most people, when you first come to a new country, you do want to travel pretty light, especially if it's your very first time, right? If you're coming as that exploratory tourist, you want to have the flexibility to move on to another country or change directions or make dramatic changes of one type or another very easily. You don't want to do anything that reduces your flexibility until you know what you're going to be doing. The exceptions to that, for example, when I used to move around a lot, I used to move within visa limits as much as possible. I didn't keep a main home, and just basically we were true digital nomads. We moved wherever we could as our visas allowed. And in doing that, we knew we would be making a commitment to a new country for a certain amount of time, the visa limit, but there's no way we were making a commitment for a long time. I feel like I can't speak today. And when we would do that, right, we would bring about, for 4 people, we would bring 11 pieces of luggage, which is a lot, but it's only between 2 and 3 per person. It wasn't ridiculous. And that allowed us to have enough stuff that we could be flexible and move from thing to thing. And sometimes we would take that and move from country to country without ever going back to the United States into storage to make any switches of clothing or items or whatever. But it also allowed us to be able to move all of our stuff by hand and still fit into a rental car under extreme circumstances, but it was difficult. It was cutting it very close. But we knew we were making a commitment anywhere we went for at least 90 days because that would be off in the visa limit. And so there was no way, short of like an all-out war, that we would be leaving short of that time. So we were just making this 90-day commitment, being like, one way or another, we have a rental apartment, we rented a car, we have our luggage, we're going to live with this, and you do your best. If you don't like it, well, you're just going to move on to the next country after that. You do have to balance that with every trip back to the United States is a big hassle. So I would say bring a moderate amount, enough that you can still move it. And this is for most people, right? Absolutely lots of different cases out there, so adapt as needed. But on average, I'd say bring enough that you feel you can live for quite some time. You can buy some things here in country. For me, one of the problems is I can't buy shoes here in country, so that's a challenge. And have those things. Figure out if you're going to live in a hotel, a tiny apartment, a big apartment. Absolutely. Make all those decisions. Maybe move around from town to town a little bit. And then on your next trip, bring as much as you possibly can. And definitely, if you're going to be moving abroad, you want to unload what you have back in the United States as much as possible. All of that stuff that you keep in a storage unit is going to weigh you down over time. You don't want to get rid of so much that you are resenting the lack of important memorabilia or nostalgic items or things you just really care about. So you want to be careful. But if you know you're moving on to a new country and you find a place that's going to be permanent, probably moving those things on with you one way or another over time is going to make sense. For us, what we did, we knew we were coming down to Nicaragua to stay when we came down. We brought as much as we could possibly fit into a private jet. For real, we actually took it to its weight limit. And so we brought tons and tons and tons of luggage down on that flight. Every time we come back from the United States, we bring as much as we can reasonably bring in our luggage, as much clothing as we can shove in, new shoes. But sometimes we buy things, sometimes it's just taking things out of storage that we want to move down. We know at some point we're planning on bringing down a shipping container and having our storage unit in the United States go away. We've been here for a number of years. We've put in tons and tons of time into Nicaragua, and we know that we are making this our home base. So putting our storage stuff here makes sense for us. For a lot of people, it will make sense to keep a storage unit in the United States or wherever your home country is, potentially indefinitely. Find one that's small and cheap and keep your stuff down to a minimum, but you may want to always have something in your home country. That's absolutely fine. That might be something you want to do. We have found at this point that the cost of a monthly storage unit is simply too high, and it would be more cost effective for us over a reasonable amount of time to pay for a shipping container to come down to Nicaragua with all of our stuff and stop making that payment in the United States. And then all those things that we wish we had with us will be with us, and it'll make living in Nicaragua a little bit easier. It'll also mean we have way too much stuff here, but we'll have some things to sell or throw out or donate or whatever, and we'll do it here rather than in the United States, where here it makes a little bit more of a difference. So that's a positive impact for us, even if we're bringing down and shipping a bunch of stuff we don't need to ship. There's reasons why it's not so bad, and for us, eventually it's going to pay for itself by not having the storage unit. But in general, yes, you want to travel relatively light and bring stuff down in stages. And over a very short period of time living here in Nicaragua, I think you will get that feeling, say 6 to 12 months. You will have a very good idea of there's a bunch of things that you're used to having in the United States that either you have already replaced and it doesn't matter, a shower curtain, for example, or things that you decide, wow, I don't really need this at all, and why would I keep it? I don't feel emotionally attached to it. It's not an important childhood memory, for example. And so donate that, right? Or bring it here and donate it or sell it or whatever, but don't keep a lot of unnecessary things. The Nicaraguan lifestyle, generally, there are exceptions, but generally is going to teach you that living with fewer things is easy and good and healthy. The idea in the United States tends very much towards buy, and own things and accumulate things and have lots and lots of things. So most of us, when we go to move out of the United States, have so much stuff that we fill storage units with it. I still have more things in my storage unit in Texas than I own in all of Nicaragua. That's crazy because the house I have in Nicaragua is many times the size of any house I've ever had in the United States. So it's weird that all my things for a house are there and my house for the things is here, but that's how it works out. People here tend to live fairly lean as far as purchasing, both because that's a money usage that is not necessary when you live here, but also because it is simply part of the culture not to just buy things for the sake of buying it. The idea that you're going to go out and do shopping therapy is not really a thing. Now, that said, once it is common if you come down and have a significant other who's living here. Once they have access to an American income, there is a certain tendency towards beginning to shop a lot more. And there are malls and stores and places to go to spend that money if that's what you want to do. So it's not that it's impossible. It's not that no one does. But in general, the culture leans away from it. And even if you're not going to be completely transitioning to a Nicaraguan lifestyle of buying almost nothing, chances are it will encourage you to not buy and own and collect as much stuff simply because no one else does either, and you just become steeped in that. And the effort of buying things is much higher, which I love. I can get things when I need them, but I have to stop and think about it. I have to put in some effort to get it. I have to really want it rather than just going on Amazon and going, I'll have it in a few hours, whatever, and think nothing of it. The rapid change in how we spend our money was unbelievable. And now when we buy things, they tend to be things that we really want and really use. And we have far more money to spend on things when we decide we do need something. It's improved our life as far as how much we store and how much we buy and the quality of what we buy and the effectiveness, the efficacy of what we buy has improved greatly. And that may just be us, but I think that's something that most people are going to encounter, at least to some degree. Just that shift away from rapid low effort buying really does make you more conscientious about what you buy. And I think that that's generally a pretty good thing. So thanks for joining me. Thanks for the questions, Andrew. More everybody, scroll down, ask more questions, leave your comments, talk about what you've done for storage. Especially, this is a good one. Let us know what you did for storage and like how much you kept in wherever your home country is. When did you decide to bring how much down? Did you sell things there? Did you bring it all here? Did you regret it? All that. Like and subscribe, share on social media, tell your friends. If you'd like to help support the show, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller, and I will see all of you tomorrow.